The hall of the alien court glowed with silver light. Tall pillars rose into the misty ceiling, carved with strange symbols that told the story of ancient victories. Around the hall, alien nobles sat in silence, their eyes glowing with cold amusement. At the center stood the alien noble, proud and cruel. His voice cut through the air as he mocked the visitor before him. The visitor was a human officer. He wore the dark uniform of Earth's fleet. His boots clicked on the stone floor as he stood firm, unshaken by the laughter that echoed from every corner of the hall. His eyes did not move from the alien noble, though he felt the weight of every gaze pressing down on him. The alien noble raised a hand. Servants pushed forward a young woman. She moved slowly, her head bowed. A veil of pale silk covered her face. She was fragile, thin, and silent. She did not look at the human. She did not look at her father. She looked only at the floor. "This," the alien noble declared, his voice sharp with mockery, "is my daughter. She has never spoken. She is silent and weak. I give her to you, human, as a gift. Take her. Use her. She is nothing." Laughter filled the hall. The nobles clapped their long hands, their voices cold and cruel. They laughed at the human. They laughed at the girl. To them, this was entertainment. A game played at the expense of both. The human officer did not laugh. His chest tightened as he looked at the girl. He saw the tremble in her shoulders, the way she kept her hands pressed close to her chest. She was not weak. She was frightened. There was a difference, and he knew it. He stepped forward. With calm hands, he accepted her. The hall roared again with laughter, but he ignored it. He wrapped his coat around her, covering her shoulders from the cold air of the court. For a moment, the noise of the hall vanished in his mind. Only she remained. The alien noble leaned back on his throne, his mouth curling in a cruel smile. He believed he had insulted the human beyond repair. To him, the act was humiliation. A daughter who had never spoken, given away like a worthless prize. The noble did not see what was about to happen. The human officer turned to guide the girl toward the doors. His steps were steady, his expression calm. He did not want to give the alien noble more reason to laugh. But as they reached the edge of the hall, something unexpected happened. The girl's lips moved. A sound, soft as a whisper of wind, reached his ear. "Thank you?" 2 simple words. The officer stopped in his tracks. He turned his head sharply, his eyes wide with shock. The girl kept her gaze lowered, but he had heard it clearly. She had spoken. Her voice was fragile, trembling, yet filled with something more powerful than fear. No one else noticed. The laughter of the nobles drowned out the sound. To them, she was still silent. To them, she was still worthless. But the human knew the truth. She could speak. She had chosen to speak to him. His heart pounded in his chest. Why him? Why now? Questions filled his mind, but he pushed them aside. The hall was still watching. The alien noble's eyes burned with cruel delight. The human officer knew better than to show his surprise. He forced his face into calmness and kept walking. The girl's whisper lingered in his thoughts. "Thank you?" 2 words, yet they carried the weight of an entire world. She had never spoken in her father's court. She had never spoken to her own kind. And yet she had spoken to a human. As they stepped beyond the great doors, the laughter of the nobles faded behind them. The officer guided her down the long stone path toward the waiting ship. The air was cold, and the stars shimmered above, but all he could hear was the echo of her voice. Inside his heart, something shifted. He had come to this alien world to serve as an envoy, to stand as a symbol of Earth's strength and pride. Yet he felt he had stumbled into something far more personal. The girl at his side was not a gift. She was not a joke. She was a mystery, one that had chosen him for reasons he could not yet understand. The girl walked silently beside him. Her steps were slow, but there was a quiet strength in them now. She kept her eyes lowered, but for a brief moment she glanced at him. Her eyes were wide, filled with something between fear and hope. Then she lowered them again, as if afraid of being caught. The officer opened the hatch of the ship. He helped her inside, shielding her from the curious stares of the alien guards nearby. They watched with cold eyes but said nothing. To them, this was nothing more than the end of a joke. To him, it was the beginning of something far greater. The hatch closed. The engines roared to life. The ship lifted into the sky, leaving the alien palace behind. The officer stood by the window, watching the world shrink into the distance. He glanced at the girl. She sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded together. Her whisper still echoed in his mind. "Thank you?" He knew then that this was not an accident. This was not chance. Something had begun in that hall, something the alien noble had never intended. The human officer did not know where this path would lead, but he knew one thing with certainty. The silence had been broken. And once silence is broken, it can never be chained again. The stars stretched across the endless dark as the ship broke free from the alien world. Engines hummed steadily, carrying the human officer and the alien girl into the vast silence of space. The palace and its cruel laughter faded behind them, but the memory of the hall still lingered. The officer sat at the controls, his hands steady though his mind was restless. He could not stop thinking about her whisper. 2 words. So soft. So fragile. Yet powerful enough to unsettle him more than any battle he had fought. The girl sat at the far side of the cabin. Her veil had slipped back slightly, revealing a face pale like moonlight. Her eyes stayed low, but he noticed how carefully she studied the room. She looked at the stars through the window, at the strange lights of the consoles, at every detail as if each one was new to her. For a while, silence ruled the ship. Only the low hum of the engines filled the air. The officer wanted to speak but held his tongue. He did not wish to frighten her. Instead, he watched quietly, waiting for the right moment. Finally, he broke the silence. "You spoke," he said softly, his voice almost uncertain. "Why?" The girl flinched at his words. Her fingers tightened around the fabric of her dress. For a long moment, she did not answer. He thought she might retreat back into silence. Then, to his surprise, she lifted her head slightly. Her lips parted. Her voice came again, delicate and trembling. "Because you listened." The officer blinked. He leaned forward, trying to understand. "Listened?" She nodded, her eyes flickering with fear. "No one listens in the court. Not to me. Not to my voice. But when you held out your hand, I knew. You were different." Her words were broken, as if she had forgotten how to use them. Each one carried effort, like walking on wounded feet. Yet each one struck him deeper than any weapon could. The officer felt something stir inside him. He wanted to ask more. He wanted to understand what life she had lived under her father's rule, but he saw how fragile she was. He held back his questions, speaking gently instead. "You are safe here," he said. "No one will take your voice away." For the first time, she looked directly at him. Her eyes were wide, filled with uncertainty, but also with a faint spark. It was the first sign of trust. A fragile bond, like a thin thread stretched across an abyss. The ship drifted on, gliding between the stars. Hours turned into days. During that time, the officer and the girl settled into a quiet rhythm. He worked at the controls, checking their path toward Earth. She sat nearby, watching and learning. At first, she rarely spoke. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when the stars glowed against the black, she whispered questions. Simple questions. "Why do humans travel the stars? Why do you fight wars? Why do you sing songs?" The officer answered each one with patience. He told her of Earth, of oceans and forests, of rain that touched the soil and winds that carried the scent of flowers. He told her about music, about voices raised not in fear but in joy. He spoke of laughter that healed, not laughter that mocked. She listened with wide eyes, absorbing every word as though it was a secret treasure. Sometimes she smiled faintly. Other times she looked away, as if ashamed of how much she wanted to believe him. One evening, While the officer sat reviewing their star charts, he heard a sound he had not expected. A soft, broken laugh. He turned. The girl covered her mouth quickly, her cheeks glowing faintly. It was the first time she had laughed in her life. She looked frightened, as though she had committed a crime. The officer smiled gently. "Do not hide it. It suits you." Her eyes widened. She lowered her hand slowly, her lips trembling. She had lived her life surrounded by silence, forced into it by fear. And now, for the first time, she was beginning to break free. But far away, in the shadows of space, danger stirred. The alien noble had not forgotten. He had not given his daughter as a gift of peace. He had sent her as a pawn, believing she would be a weakness that could shatter humanity's pride. He did not know that his daughter was changing. He did not know that the human officer was awakening her voice. In the quiet of the ship, the officer and the girl sat together beneath the starlight. She whispered softly, almost too faint to hear. "Thank you, for showing me another world." He looked at her, his chest heavy with unspoken emotion. He knew this journey had only begun. And with each word she spoke, with each step she took, he felt they were walking towards something far greater than either of them could imagine. The stars shone brighter that night. And somewhere in the darkness, the first threads of hope began to weave their shape. The ship drifted through the dark seas of space. The stars glimmered faintly, like lanterns guiding two lost souls. Days had passed since they left the alien noble's court, and silence still filled most hours of the journey. Yet it was not the same silence as before. This silence carried weight, like something waiting to be revealed. The human officer noticed it each time he looked at her. She sat near the window, her eyes following the endless stars. Her hands rested in her lap, still and delicate. On the surface, she was quiet. But behind that quiet, he could sense a storm. He wanted to ask again about her whisper in the hall. He wanted to ask why she had chosen him, a stranger, for her first words. But he waited. He knew her voice was not something to demand. It was something she had to give when she was ready. One night, when the stars burned brighter than usual, the silence finally broke. The officer was working at the console, his eyes on the glowing screens. Behind him, he heard a soft sound. It was not the hum of the engine. It was not the creak of metal. It was her voice. "I was not born silent," she said quietly. The officer turned slowly. She was still facing the stars, her reflection shining in the glass. She continued, her voice trembling. "I could speak since I was a child. But my father hated it. He said my voice was a flaw. He told me my silence was proof of my obedience. And when I tried to speak, he punished me. So I stopped. I stopped for years." The officer's chest grew heavy. He wanted to speak, to comfort her, but he stayed quiet. She was not finished. "My voice was never gone," she whispered. "It was only hidden. Locked in shadows. I kept it there, safe where he could not touch it. But when I saw you in that hall, something changed. I wanted to try. I wanted to be heard. And for the first time, I felt safe." Her words struck him deeper than any weapon could. He realized how much courage it had taken for her to speak, even just those two words. He realized how much pain lay behind that single whisper. He stepped closer, his voice calm and steady. "No one will silence you again. Not while you are with me." Her eyes shifted from the stars to him. For a moment, she seemed to search his face, as though trying to see if he truly meant it. Then, for the first time, she gave a small nod. The officer returned to his seat, but sleep did not come to him that night. Her story weighed heavily on his mind. He thought of Earth, where children laughed freely in fields and sang without fear. He thought of her life, where even laughter was forbidden. Rage burned inside him, not for himself, but for her. The following days were different. She spoke more often, though still in quiet tones. She asked about human songs, about oceans, about the strange animals that roamed Earth. He answered each question with patience. And slowly, her voice grew stronger. One evening, she surprised him again. "I want to sing," she whispered. He turned to her, stunned. "Sing?" Her cheeks flushed, and she looked down. "You said humans sing when they are happy. I want to try. But I do not know how." The officer thought for a moment. Then he hummed softly. A simple tune. Gentle and slow. His voice filled the cabin, carrying warmth into the cold silence. Her eyes widened. She listened carefully, her lips moving as if shaping the sound. Then, in a voice barely louder than a breath, she followed. Her first attempt was broken, but her second was steadier. For the first time in her life, she sang. The sound was fragile, trembling, but beautiful. It was not the voice of weakness. It was the voice of someone stepping out of the shadows. The officer felt his throat tighten. He wanted to tell her she was more powerful than she knew. But he stayed quiet, letting her song fill the space between them. Far away, in the dark corners of the galaxy, the alien noble sat on his throne. Reports reached him of his daughter traveling with the human envoy. He laughed bitterly. To him, this was no loss. She was still his pawn. A tool to weaken humanity from within. He did not know that her voice had been set free. He did not know that the very gift he had mocked would become the spark of rebellion. Back on the ship, her song faded into silence. She looked at the officer, her lips trembling. "Thank you," she whispered again. "Not for saving me, but for hearing me." The officer met her eyes, his voice steady. "Your voice belongs to you. It is not mine to take. But if you wish, I will always listen." Her eyes glistened with unspoken tears. For the first time, she believed her words might never be chained again. And though the darkness of space surrounded them, inside the cabin there was light. The fragile light of a voice reborn. Far away from the silent ship that drifted through the stars, the alien noble sat on his throne of black stone. His court gathered around him, their eyes gleaming with cold fire. Servants bent low, carrying reports from across the galaxy. The noble listened with a cruel smile. He was proud, arrogant, and certain of his own brilliance. To the court, he spoke of strength and conquest. To himself, he thought of a different game. His daughter. When he had given her to the human envoy, the court had laughed with him. They believed it was an insult. A cruel joke at the expense of humanity. A girl who had never spoken, handed over like broken glass. But the truth was deeper. The noble had not acted out of amusement. He had acted with design. His daughter had always been more than she appeared. She was quiet, obedient, and underestimated. But her mind was sharp. She saw things no one else noticed. She remembered details, small and hidden. She had been his silent shadow, listening to everything spoken in the court. Now she was in human hands. And the noble knew that trust could be a weapon sharper than any blade. He spoke to his council, his voice rising like thunder. "Let the humans believe they have won a prize. Let them welcome her into their homes. Let them teach her their secrets. They will not know they are feeding poison into their own blood. For when the time comes, she will break them from within." His laughter filled the hall. The nobles joined him, their voices echoing through the chamber. None of them doubted his plan. To them, humanity was soft. Too soft to resist such a trap. But what the noble did not know was that his daughter's silence had never been loyalty. It had been survival. She had obeyed out of fear, not devotion. And now, far from his reach, that fear was turning into something new. On the human ship, the girl sat quietly, her hands resting on her lap. The officer guided the vessel through the endless dark, unaware of the schemes brewing behind them. Yet he noticed a change in her. Each day, her voice grew stronger. Each word she spoke carried more certainty. Sometimes he caught her staring at him, as if weighing whether she could truly trust him. Each time, he gave her patience. He did not rush her. He did not demand. He simply waited, letting her come closer on her own. One evening, she asked him a question that made his breath catch. "Do humans keep their promises?" He turned toward her, surprised by the weight in her voice. If a human is true, yes. We keep them, even when it costs us. Her eyes lowered. Her lips trembled. Then she whispered, My father makes promises too. But his are chains. The officer leaned forward, his tone steady. And mine will be keys. I will never chain you. She looked up, her eyes glistening. For the first time, he saw not just fear, but defiance. A small flame burning in the depths of her gaze. That night, she could not sleep. She dreamed of her father's court, of his harsh voice telling her she was nothing. She dreamed of his laughter, cold and sharp. She woke trembling, but when she looked across the cabin, she saw the officer still awake, keeping watch. It gave her strength. Meanwhile, the alien noble prepared his trap. He sent fleets into the shadows of space. He gave orders to captains, telling them to wait for the signal. His daughter would lead the humans into false safety. And when they opened their gates to her, the noble would strike. But the noble did not know how much his daughter had already changed. He did not know she had spoken. He did not know she had laughed. He did not know she had begun to believe in a world beyond his cruelty. Back on the ship, she spoke again, her voice stronger now. My father thinks I am his pawn. But I am not. I do not belong to him anymore. The officer watched her carefully. He saw the trembling in her hands, but also the fire in her eyes. He knew then that her voice was no longer just fragile. It was becoming powerful. He placed a hand over his chest and bowed his head slightly. Then you belong only to yourself. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. And in that moment, in the quiet cabin of a small human vessel, a silent girl who had been broken by fear began to rise as something new. She was no longer her father's shadow. She was her own. Far away, the alien noble dreamed of victory. He laughed in his court, blind to the truth. He thought his plan was perfect. He thought his daughter was still his tool. But the seeds of rebellion had already been planted. And those seeds were growing faster than he could ever imagine. The game he thought he was winning had already begun to slip from his grasp. The ship traveled through the vast emptiness of space, far from the alien noble's reach. For the first time in her life, the girl was free from his watchful eyes. The silence she once feared no longer pressed down on her. It felt different now. Softer. The human officer kept his word. He did not force her to speak. He did not demand answers. Instead, he gave her time. He gave her patience. And with every small choice he made, he built something her father never could. Trust. She noticed it in the little things. The way he covered her with his coat when she shivered. The way he offered food without pushing her to eat. The way he stayed awake when she woke trembling from dark dreams. He did not tell her what she must be. He simply stood beside her, letting her be. Slowly, she began to change. One evening, as the stars burned bright outside the cabin, she whispered, Tell me about Earth. The officer looked up, surprised. Then he smiled gently. He spoke of oceans so wide that no one had ever seen the other side. He spoke of forests filled with green, where sunlight filtered through the leaves like golden fire. He spoke of mountains that touched the clouds, and rivers that carved paths through stone. Her eyes widened with wonder. She leaned forward, drinking in every word as if it were a treasure. She had grown up in a palace of cold stone, where silence ruled and laughter was forbidden. The world he described felt like a dream too beautiful to be real. Do people sing there? She asked. Yes, he answered with warmth. They sing when they work. They sing when they are happy. They even sing when they are sad, because the song gives them strength. She lowered her eyes. I want to hear that someday. His voice softened. You will. Each night she asked for more. More stories. More songs. He told her about children running through fields, about festivals filled with music and firelight, about the strange joy humans carried even in hardship. She listened with wide eyes, and for the first time, she began to smile without fear. One night she asked a question that startled him. Why do humans laugh even when the world is cruel? The officer thought carefully before answering. Because laughter is not weakness. It is defiance. When the world tries to break us, we laugh to remind ourselves we are still alive. Her lips parted in wonder. A small sound escaped her throat, uncertain at first. Then, softly, she laughed. It was fragile. Trembling. Yet real. The officer's chest tightened. To him, that laugh was more powerful than the roar of any fleet. It was proof that she was no longer her father's prisoner. The bond between them grew with each passing day. She began to sit closer to him. Sometimes, when fear crept into her heart, she reached for his hand. At first, her touch was hesitant, like she expected him to pull away. But he never did. He held her hand gently, steady and warm, until she no longer trembled. For her, it was more than comfort. It was freedom. She had lived her whole life in shadows, surrounded by cruelty. Now, in the quiet cabin of a small ship, she was learning what it meant to be seen. And yet, danger was never far. In the depths of space, the alien nobles' fleets moved like hunters in the dark. They waited for the signal. They believed the girl would serve as bait. They believed she would lead the humans into weakness. But the girl no longer thought of herself as her father's pawn. With every story of Earth, with every laugh, with every promise kept by the officer, she felt a new strength rising inside her. One night, as the stars drifted silently outside, she looked at him with steady eyes. "My father believes I am still his," she whispered. "But I am not. He cannot take me back." The officer met her gaze. His voice was firm. "He never will." Her lips curved into a faint smile. She leaned closer, her voice trembling but sure. "Then I will trust you." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of her whole life. She had never trusted anyone before. Not even herself. But now, for the first time, she was willing to give that trust to him. The officer placed his hand over his chest in a small gesture of honor. "I will not break it." Her eyes glistened with emotion. She closed them, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel safe. Outside, the stars burned with silent fire. Inside, two lives, once broken by silence and cruelty, had begun to weave a bond stronger than any chain. Neither of them knew what storms waited ahead. Neither of them knew how close the alien noble's shadow had crept. But in that moment, trust had been forged. And trust, once born, is a force no empire can kill. The stars were quiet. The ship glided through the void, its engine steady, its path clear. For a while, it felt as if peace might last. The officer sat at the console, scanning the charts. The girl sat beside him, her head tilted slightly as she studied the glowing maps. Then the silence shattered. An alarm cut through the cabin. Red lights flashed. The officer's eyes shot to the screen. Dozens of signals appeared, fast moving and closing in. Warships. The girl's breath caught. She knew their shapes. Sleek, sharp, and merciless. They were her father's fleet. The officer gritted his teeth. His hands moved swiftly over the controls. "Hold on." The ship shook as the first blast struck the shields. Fire streaked across the dark, cutting through the stars. The girl clutched the seat, her heart pounding. Memories of her father's throne room, of his cold eyes and harsh words, rushed back. But she was not there anymore. She was here. And here, she was not silent. The fleet surrounded them. A voice filled the cabin, cold and commanding. It was the alien noble himself. "My daughter," he said, his words echoing with cruel pride. "Return to me. The game is over. The human cannot protect you. Do not resist." The officer pressed a button, muting the channel. His jaw tightened. He looked at the girl. "We can fight this. But I need you with me." Her hands trembled. For a moment, fear threatened to drown her. All her life, her father's voice had been law. His will had been her cage. But when she looked at the officer, she saw something different. Not chains. Not cruelty. But trust. She took a deep breath. Her voice broke free. I will not go back. The officer's chest filled with fire. Then we hold together. The battle erupted. Human weapons flared as he pushed the ship to its limits. The alien noble's fleet closed in, their firepower overwhelming. The ship rattled and groaned under the strain. The girl's fear grew with every strike, but so did her resolve. For the first time, she raised her voice not in whispers, but in defiance. She pressed the comms button before the officer could stop her. Her father's face appeared on the screen, cruel and arrogant. Daughter, he sneered. You think you can escape me? You are mine. You were born to obey. Her voice rang out, strong and trembling. No. I was born with a voice. And it is not yours to take. The court behind her father gasped. The alien noble's smile faltered. For the first time, he saw his daughter not as a silent shadow, but as something beyond his control. The officer took the chance. With fierce precision, he fired the ship's cannons, tearing through one of the enemy cruisers. The explosion lit the void, shaking the fleet. But the noble was relentless. More ships pressed in, their weapons burning. The officer's ship shuddered as the shields failed. Alarm screamed. Smoke filled the cabin. The girl stood, her hands gripping the console. Her eyes blazed. She had lived her whole life in silence, bowed under her father's cruelty. But now, standing beside a human who believed in her, she found her strength. She shouted into the comms, her voice carrying across the fleet. I am not your pawn. I am not your tool. I am free. The words struck like lightning. The soldiers of her father's fleet hesitated. Many had never heard her voice. Some whispered in disbelief. Others lowered their eyes, shaken by her defiance. The officer seized the moment. He pulled the ship into a sharp dive, weaving between enemy fire. He launched counterstrikes, tearing through 2 more ships. Each explosion lit the stars with fire. The alien noble roared with fury, his face twisted with rage. Ungrateful child! I will burn the human who poisoned you! But his rage only fueled her courage. She turned to the officer, her voice steady now. Do not give him what he wants. Do not let him take me back. The officer looked at her, his eyes hard with resolve. Never. The battle raged on. Fire streaked across the heavens. The officer fought with every skill he had. The girl fought with her voice, each word breaking the chains her father had built. Together, they turned despair into resistance. At last, the noble's fleet wavered. Human reinforcements arrived, answering the officer's distress signal. Earth's ships stormed in, their guns blazing. The balance shifted. The alien noble's fleet broke, retreating into the darkness. The cabin was silent once more, except for the sound of the girl's breathing. Her eyes glistened, her body trembling. Yet her voice was strong when she spoke. I am free, she whispered, and I will never be silent again. The officer placed a hand on her shoulder. His voice was low, filled with steady fire. Your father cannot chain you now. Not while humanity stands with you. Outside the window, the stars still burned, but now they seemed brighter. For in the heat of betrayal and fire, a new strength had been born. The smoke cleared slowly from the cabin. The ship drifted in silence after the storm of battle. Outside, wreckage floated in the darkness, glowing faintly in the starlight. The alien noble's fleet had been driven back, scattered into the void. Humanity's reinforcements now guarded the skies. The officer sat at the console, his hands still tight on the controls. His heart pounded, but his gaze was steady. He turned toward the girl. She was standing, trembling from exhaustion, but her eyes shone with something fierce and unbroken. She had shouted her defiance across the stars. She had shattered her father's chains. And now, she was free. The officer rose from his seat. He walked to her side and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. She met his eyes, her lips trembling with unspoken words. Your voice changed everything, he said softly. She swallowed hard. It was not only mine. It was because you believed I had won. Her words cut deep into his heart. In her gaze, he saw more than gratitude. He saw trust, courage, and something stronger. A bond that had been born in silence, tested in fire, and now burned like light in the darkness. A message arrived on the comms. The human fleet commander appeared on the screen, his voice firm. "We have secured the area. But this is not the end. The alien noble will strike again. He will not forgive what happened today." The officer nodded. "Let him come. Humanity will be ready." The girl stepped forward. Her voice, once hidden, rang with quiet power. "And so will I." The commander blinked in surprise. For the first time, he heard her speak. He looked at her with respect, as if realizing she was more than just the daughter of an enemy. She was proof of something greater. When the screen faded, silence returned to the cabin. The girl turned to the officer, her eyes glistening. "All my life, I thought silence was safety. I thought my voice was a curse. But now I know it is strength. And you gave it back to me." The officer shook his head gently. "No. It was always yours. I only reminded you that it was waiting." Her lips curved into a faint smile. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but they did not fall. She stepped closer, her voice soft. "Then let me say the words again. Thank you. Not just for saving me. Thank you for giving me hope." He felt his chest tighten. He had faced battles before, had seen fire and death, but nothing compared to this moment. He reached out, carefully taking her hand in his. "Your hope is stronger than any weapon," he said. "And now it belongs not only to you. It belongs to humanity as well." The girl held his hand tightly. For the first time, she smiled without fear. It was a small smile, fragile yet unshakable. Outside, the stars blazed brighter, as if the universe itself was listening. Far away, in the dark throne room of his palace, the alien noble raged. His fleet had failed. His daughter had defied him before the galaxy. He had thought her silence eternal. But now her voice was beyond his reach. And that voice would spread. On the human ship, the officer turned to the console and opened a channel. He recorded a message for Earth and for every allied world that would listen. His words were calm, but each one carried fire. "Humanity has faced many enemies. But today, we fought not only with ships and guns. We fought with something greater. We fought with the courage to give a voice to the voiceless. To lift the broken. To turn silence into strength. Let every world know, this is who we are. This is why humanity endures." The message ended. Silence returned to the cabin. The girl looked at him with awe. "Do you believe the galaxy will hear us?" He nodded firmly. "They will. Because truth cannot be silenced." Her eyes softened. She whispered, almost like a prayer, "Then let my voice be part of theirs." The officer's heart swelled with pride. He had come to this world as an envoy, carrying the banner of humanity. But he had left with something far greater. A companion who had found her voice. A bond forged not in power, but in trust. He squeezed her hand gently. "Together, we will face whatever comes." Outside, the human fleet gathered in formation, their ships shining like a constellation of defiance. In the center, the small vessel drifted quietly, carrying not only 2 lives but also a promise. A promise that silence would never again be chains. And so, in the aftermath of fire, humanity gave its answer to the galaxy. They were not only warriors. They were protectors. They were builders of trust. They were givers of hope. They were the ones who turned a whisper into a battle cry. And that was why humanity could never be broken.